The Celestial Empire of California is one of the more popular locations to be encountered or even play within the After the End lore slash mod. It spans the region of California down to where, traditionally Baja California in Mexico would be. And it is comprised of at least 5 key kingdoms. Obviously, this lore could be tweaked depending on the time period you're putting the setting within, and various tweaks and adjustments. However, this video will aim to how to not only adapt the setting of the Celestial Empire of California and the surrounding regions into the lore of Dungeons and Dragons, but B, also incorporate it in a way that makes sense to your players and can be accessed by almost anyone who would not have really general knowledge of the setting. To give a brief overview of California in the mod, in the region that you will be adapting to kind of fit more Dungeons and Dragons slash fantasy lore, whatever you really want to use. The Empire was founded, date doesn't super matter as this is flexible, by Elton the Lawgiver Yudko, the first emperor of California. He adopted various cultures to kind of fit this empire as it was growing, including Native American slash Californian cultures, actual American United States cultural references. A lot of Hollywood works were incorporated into sort of official beliefs and practices. A lot of Chinese sort of ideologies of bureaucracy, mandate of heaven, was all kind of put forward and adopted towards this new Californian culture. In addition, all these various groups, there's Muslims in the southeast near LA, at least in the official lore, and these all groups had to be fit together to kind of harmonize, and for a while this worked out very well for Elton, but as his descendants started to rule, things went under and this massive territory began to shift. Things began to go wrong for the Empire after about a century of prosperous Ludco rule. Eventually, one of Elton's descendants would grow a little ambitious. Seeing his empire stretching from California to Baja is not enough. He, along with many troops gathered from the swelling bureaucracy, the various sub-governors of California, they all pushed north into Cascadia. In official lore, the inhabitants of this region were a female-led kind of druidic society, and while those can still be definitely present within the D&D lore, it's definitely an easy place to kind of say, here be elves, and have a little bit of an elven empire or twist working with these humans. Regardless of who is inhabiting this area exactly, this massive invasion failed spectacularly, overrunning the state of Jefferson, the Empire's northern regions, and creating a massive political crisis that is still affecting the Empire even almost a century after this catastrophic invasion. To almost cap off this catastrophic failure, not only did the Californian Expeditionary Force rout en masse, but various sub-governors under the Emperor's leadership began to question their loyalties, demanding more, tax exemptions, kind of greater autonomy, wanted to do their own thing. And while the Emperor still commanded a vast direct domain, things were going from bad to worse. It is reported during these few years that earthquakes were raging, crops were failing, and as the northern provinces were continually being overran by raiders from these elven and druidic peoples, things were going from bad to worse, and the Emperor was powerless to stop it, further undermining his waning authority. In the chaos of the Empire's retreat from the Pacific Northwest as well, the Emperor himself was slain, leaving the throne vacant to various infighting, and many factions still vied for control of their own realm. Eventually, things would stabilize as the northern invaders were pushed back. The northern province, while desolated, was secure. However, many of the outlying territories of the Empire, as far as Vegas, were lost forever. And eventually this would kind of translate into an age of stagnation as a new ruler would be decided a few years later and take the throne. In broad strokes, what followed this age of instability, while again things returned to, former prosperity, a little bit of a shell of itself. However, these local governors of more or less kingdoms of their own right in the south, the north, and even the western coasts of California itself and Baja. They all became more independent from the emperor, who only really retained sort of a religious authority, more akin to a pope than an emperor. This is more or less the setting you currently find yourself in. Your players can work for any of these various factions, or the emperor himself to kind of re-establish authority, as that's kind of what the gist of your playthroughs will be in this region, sort of vying for control within these 5 or 6 factions that make up California. Culturally, California is divided into 4 distinct groups, the first of which are the Bay Folk. These are the people who are situated more well in the Bay Area of California, their key city being San Francisco. Obviously, various other regions in this sort of broad area are included. However, these are the more wealthy Californians, well-to-do. They're well known for their wise men within their own religion, asceticism, this broad imperial truth throughout California. In addition, these men are traders. They're kind of used to the whole cosmopolitan California mindset, and they're pretty similar to how you'd think of, like the preppy California not Valley Girl, but, the sort of the influencers you'd see today. The next culture is Valleyman, centered around Sacramento, sort of, where Napa Valley is. It's a more hardworking, more rural culture than its, coastal counterparts. A little poorer and more, it is the backyard of the emperor himself, who has his seat of power in Sacramento. It is sort of the backbone and the heartland of the Celestial Empire, providing, the largest amount of troops and ready conscripts for the various imperial armies that have been assembled throughout the years. The region is, while independent from the Emperor's direct jurisdiction at the moment, it is probably the most fanatically loyal, providing the most troops and ready-to-do people for various conflicts. The third culture is Angelino, and these are the people who inhabit the kind of the corridor of San Diego, Los Angeles, hence the name. This direct group of people is sort of divided into 2. The sort who are more focused on the imperial cults. They venerate more, Hollywood stars, since, it's in the area. Sort of twisting them into, saint-like beings. And then there's a sizable Muslim minority that actually united the area before the empire was created, and it's still in existence. I know there is sort of a divide currently ongoing in the area between the ruling houses, as the current house, Carmine, ousted from I don't want to butcher the last name, but it was a Muslim warlord who united the region at first and then served the empire. They've been kind of forced into a pseudo-exile and are vying to regain power. So that's sort of the divide that's inhabiting the Angelino kind of psyche. The fourth and final culture inhabiting the empire is Cascadian. These are the people who make up the northern territories that was originally counter-invaded by these elven/druidic influences. They still have many of their, own culture left over in this more or less still devastated land. It's sort of a leftover of that military expedition up there, but it's where you'd see sort of the Pacific Northwest starting to take place. That's not under direct, elven/druidic Gaian jurisdiction. Still swearing nominal loyalty to the emperor. Religiously, the Empire of California broadly, it follows sort of an imperial code. It stresses the importance of bureaucracy, much like how ancient Chinese beliefs sort of mirrored. They worship American idols, specifically from movies or Hollywood. Personas like Captain America would be venerated, incorporated into sort of like religious orders. It combines aspects from Christianity, obviously Islam. Additionally, there's a large following that mirrors Scientology that is a large part of the Californian truth, as obviously that whole cult sort of started within the region. At least these are the official religions within the lore. Obviously, you can combine elven and dwarven beliefs, as, these elves have overrun the northern part of the empire or intermingled within the cosmopolitan city areas. Additionally, the Sierra Nevada mountains has a large dwarven population, obviously. and their beliefs would be passed down as well and kind of interspersed with the humans sort of in the valley part of the region in California. Now is the segment I'd like to sort of use to talk about the various foreigners or fantasy powers that are also within the periphery of what you could use as California's core territories. Firstly, there are two key outside foreign threats that are, occurring within even the main game of After the End. There are Russian traders. They're not a large invasion force per se, but certainly they are offering their services for hire. Maybe bands of mercenaries or soldiers are available to be recruited by certain individuals on California's coastal tiles. And in addition, they could launch an expedition sort of into more of the Cascadia region, but whatever Siberian warlord would not have the, let's say, manpower to conquer the empire outright, but rather subjugate sort of a surrounding territory. Additionally, a sort of larger invasion that's prevalent in the western part of After the End's coast would definitely be the Japanese shogunate or emperorship, whoever you would really want it to be under. But obviously you can incorporate sort of samurai lore and motifs within this whole kabobble. And in addition, you can bring in, even with the Russians, sort of folklore from the region. You could bring in, Japanese demons, sort of folk legends, kind of domesticated and fighting for either the Japanese or the Russians, and sort of have things go that way to kind of hammer home the fantasy elements. The final talking point I would like to make is more just general ideas you could use, some directions for adventures that could be taking place in Dungeons & Dragons. Firstly, the obvious one for this whole area would be to work for the Celestial Emperor himself. Let's say there is a new ambitious young emperor of the House Yudko looking to reassert authority to undo about a century and a half of decay. You can have a campaign of intrigue, trying to reunify what was once lost and fighting foreign wars and domestic. That's one route. Another is you could always work with one of these mercenary bands, either from Japan or Russia, going along the coast of California and the Pacific in search of riches and gold and glory, fighting for various of these petty warlords or states, more or less just causing chaos, but also, chaos can be fun. Another idea to be put forth is the big split, and one of the big scripted events in the mod itself is the divide between House Carmine and I remember it's Abbas, who are the two houses vying to rule Southern California. You could support one of these sides. You could support House Abbas in reclaiming its rightful title as the ruler of Southern California, or help cement House Carmine's authority. Be kind of a fun way to kind of play a rebellion or a counterinsurgency officer. And then another, fun location would obviously be in the Pacific Northwest. You could play a lot into. Maybe you are working to kind of rebuild the whole area. Maybe it's a slower paced game. You're in a backwoods town trying to rebuild things, or, work to mend relations with the elves, or, perhaps you're even sent to fight against them. Who knows? There's a lot of directions you can go. I mean, if you want to go further west, you would go into the Sierra Nevada mountain range where, there's dwarves, and the dwarves would, interact with their own, interpersonal relations with the kings in California, offer missions from them. I mean, perhaps you're an expedition sent even to Vegas. I mean, obviously, Fallout's the main post-apocalyptic setting everyone knows about, but perhaps you're a part of a Californian foray back to take the territory, and it's centered not around Hoover Dam like in the game, but more around the city itself, folklore, just a eastern expedition to kind of regain lost glory. But however you take it, it's a very interesting part of the setting that I believe can go far and get a lot of mileage out with any sort of group, and really have a fun time adventuring with their buddies. So this has been sort of my region in focus video for the Californian Empire and After the End. Kind of following up on the video I made a few months ago. I know it wasn't the most popular video I'd done, so I'm not sure if there's a demand for this, but I wanted to make it regardless. Feel free to let me know if you'd like to see another region discussed, and kind of, go over everything from there. Thank you for watching. Leave me feedback. This has been James B2 / Magoose Galoose signing off.